Hello friends, I hope you all are fine and you're enjoying your days at home. Today we are going to start the second section of Unit 9. The topic is the new government. At the beginning you see some of the important vocabularies and terms that are necessary in this unit, and you may have these terms in your exams and especially in international exams. So if you see any difficulty facing these terms, you can come to the beginning of the video and you can check them from here. Challenges to the new government. As you know, we studied about George Washington and how he faced some difficulties during his presidency. Today we are going to learn that Washington established central authority at home and avoided war abroad. So we are going to deal with problems both inside America and the relations between America and other nations. The central question of this chapter is how did two crises reveal the power of national government? There are two crises that we are going to focus. The first one is competing claims to territory in Trans-Appalachian West. Trans-Appalachian West was a land between Appalachian Mountains and Mississippi River. The 1783 Treaty of Paris had tried to resolve these claims, but unfortunately some years later Spain, Britain, the United States and Native Americans all claimed ports of this area. Crisis number 2 was Whiskey Rebellion. In 1794, protests against the government's taxes on whiskey by back country farmers came up, and they tried to protest against the taxes that were supposed to be on whiskey. We will see why whiskey was important, but before going to other slides, let me have a short introduction about whiskey. Most of the farmers, because they use their corns in order to produce whiskey, and whiskey was more lucrative than other farm productions. So after, when people tried to use corns or other things for preparing whiskey, the need for corn increased and there was lack of efficient sources. That's why some of the so the government came here to ban whiskey and to put taxes on whiskey, but these southern people tried to take protests. Okay, the problems at home. Competing claims to territory. Native Americans in the Northwest Territory wanted their own nation and defeated federal troops in battles in 1790 and 1791. President, on the opposite side, President sent troops to Northwest Territory to defend American interests. General Anthony, the very brave one, the most important general during Washington's presidency, and his troops defeated the Native Americans at the Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1794. And consequently, the natives were upset. The British did not help them, but British did not want to start a war with the United States because they were not in a good situation to declare war to any other country, because they still had problems in their own country, financial problems, problems with France and other countries. So what was the outcome of this war? So 12 Native American tribes signed the Treaty of Greenville in 1795. They ceded means surrendered, and they surrendered much of the land in present-day Ohio and parts of Illinois, Michigan, and Indiana to the United States government officials. As you see here, Ohio here, as you can see, this is the land surrendered by Native Americans, and later America got this land from these first American tribes. Challenges to the new government. Right now we have problem at home, the second problem at home, Whiskey Rebellion. In 1794, a group of farmers in western Pennsylvania had an uprising in protest of the whiskey tax. Farmers depended on distilling corn into whiskey since it was more profitable than raw grain. It was used like money to trade for other goods and was easy to transport across the Appalachians. Some rebels attacked and burned the home of the regional tax collectors, while others threatened an armed attack on Petersburg. What was the solution actually for these upheavals in America back then? Washington sent troops to put down the rebellion and to show that the federal government would enforce the law along the western frontier. 13,000 soldiers fought into western PA to march to put down the uprising. The rebels scattered, but federal troops caught a group of 20 accused leaders. 2 men were charged with treason and sentenced to hang, but George Washington pardoned them. He stopped executing them. Right now we face with the problems that come across with foreign nations. The key question is this: why did events in Europe create problems for America? The events we are going to discuss 2 things. Number 1 event is French Revolution. The French Revolution was a war in Europe because of the economical crisis that happened, and people tried to protest and they seized the government. So event number 2 was the arguments with Spain. There was a war in Europe. In 1789, a financial crisis led the French to rebel against the government, called the French Revolution. French Revolution is the most famous revolution in the history of Europe. Afraid for their own monarchies, other European countries joined the fight against the French revolutionaries. French responded by declaring war on Britain, as well as Holland and Spain. The British made it difficult for the United States to remain neutral. The British seized American cargo ships coming from the French West Indies. We should also pinpoint that there were 2 forces in America back then, between Thomas Jefferson and Hamilton. Hamilton was supporting the British because he thought that the trades with the British was much more important than any other thing in the for this country. On the other hand, Thomas Jefferson thought that as the French supported Americans during the independence, Americans should also support the French. So, George Washington stayed between these 2 characters, but indirectly he supported Hamilton, and consequently in 1793 Jefferson resigned as Secretary of State. Right now we have some solutions for these problems here. In what became known as Jay's Treaty, Chief Justice John Jay traveled to England in 1974 to persuade the British to pay damages for the United States vessel they had seized. So, the British were supposed to pay all damages that they had caused during their war with France, and the British also agreed to leave the Ohio Valley by 1796 to avoid future tension. Why they finally agreed to leave that part was that they had heard of the Battle of Fallen Timbers, and they knew that Americans right now are united and they're much more powerful than before. That's why they tried to leave these places. Some United States citizens were not pleased with Jay's treaty since it failed to open up the profitable British Caribbean trade to Americans. It also allowed the British to continue their fur trade on the American side of the United States-Canadian border. In our classes, during the regular classes we talked about the importance of fur and silk in America, but the silk will come later. But back then, fur was the most important trade for America, and they had important problems with the English. So we see that these problems pop out during this period, and we will see how Americans try to handle this situation. John Jay, as you saw in the previous slide, he was responsible for this treaty, the agreement that ended the dispute with the Britain over American shipping during the French Revolution. Number 4 problem: disputes with Spain. Tensions arose on the frontier over the boundaries between Spanish lands and the United States. Spain controlled the port of New Orleans, which guards the mouth of the Mississippi River. Solution: Pekingese Treaty in 1795 set the northern boundary of Florida and southern boundary of the United States at the 31st parallel. It also gave Americans the right to travel freely on the Mississippi River and store goods at the port of New Orleans. As you can see here, this was the part that they claimed during this treaty, Pekingese Treaty, and it was much more better than the other treaties. Later, as you see, it was before this treaty, but here we see that America back then, after this treaty, tried to identify this land as its own land here. Americans were given a sense of security over how the United States dealt with those challenges. More Americans were moving west, and the other problem came up, maybe the biggest problem. Washington announced that he would not run for president, and this led America into division, and they didn't know what the future would be without George Washington. Thank you so much. This is the end of this lesson. I hope you would all study very well, and please take care of yourself, and hope to see you in class. Thank you so much.